I guess if there's a right way to start this, it's by admitting I never really understood what being enough meant to her. My name's Curtis. I'm not the guy you see in movies who storms out and never looks back. I'm the one who stays. I'm the one who keeps hoping that maybe tomorrow she'll smile the way she used to. Mara, that's her name, was like a firework the first time I met her. Bright, loud, impossible to ignore. We collided at some dusty little bookstore that neither of us probably ever planned to visit again. She dropped a stack of poetry books. I helped her pick them up. She joked that anyone who liked the same poets she did was destined to break her heart. I should have listened harder. We married 2 years later. Quiet ceremony. No drama. Just two young people thinking love was strong enough to weather anything. For a while, it was. But real life doesn't care how good your beginning was. Bills, stress, aging dreams, they creep in without knocking. I didn't notice at first how restless Mara became. How the sparkle in her eyes started flickering when she looked at me. How her hugs felt lighter, more like polite gestures than real affection. I tried harder. Maybe too hard. I picked up extra shifts. Paid off her car. Remembered every little date that mattered. I thought if I just loved her louder, she'd hear it over whatever noise was pulling her away. But love doesn't work like that, does it? One evening, she came home smelling like perfume I didn't recognize, wearing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I asked her where she had been, and that's when she said it. I'm not your toy, Curtis. You can't just expect me to sit on a shelf and wait for you. Those words ripped through me harder than if she had just screamed she didn't love me anymore. I didn't scream back. I didn't throw her things out the window. I just sat there, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking clock on the wall, the sounds of my world splitting quietly at the seams. And for the first time, I realized maybe I was the one clinging to something that had already crumbled. Maybe letting her go wasn't losing. Maybe it was the only way to save what little dignity I had left. So I let her be free. I didn't argue. I didn't chase. I didn't even ask her to stay. I simply got up, picked up my jacket, and left the house to her. No final speech. No dramatic exit. Just silence. She thought she'd won. She thought she'd finally shaken me loose like old dust from a worn-out rug. But life, funny enough, has its own ideas about consequences. And Mara, my beautiful, restless Mara, had no idea how devastating the absence of a man who once loved her completely could be. The beginning of her freedom was the beginning of everything unraveling. The first few days after I left were a blur. I stayed at an old motel on the edge of town, the kind of place where the walls are thin and the vending machine gives you stale candy bars if you're lucky. It wasn't glamorous, but it was silent, and for the first time in months, I didn't have to wonder if Mara was lying to me. Still, even though I had walked away, my mind stayed chained to her. I kept expecting my phone to buzz with a text. Something simple. Come home. I'm sorry. Anything. But there was nothing. Just empty screens and a heavier silence than I knew how to carry. On the fourth night, I gave in. I drove past the house, parking half a block away like some kind of sad ghost haunting his own life. The lights were on. Her car was there. But as I sat there watching, another car pulled up, a sleek black sedan, way too fancy for anyone we knew. And then I saw him. Some guy, tall, cocky posture, laughing too loudly, walking up to the door like he belonged there. Mara opened it wearing the same robe she used to greet me in. She smiled wider for him than she had for me in months. He didn't even knock. He just walked in like he'd done it 100 times before. I sat there gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Part of me wanted to storm up, kick the door down, demand to know how long it had been going on. But another part, the part that was finally, painfully honest, knew the answer didn't matter anymore. She had moved on without even hesitating. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the motel ceiling, listening to the buzz of the old neon sign outside my window, wondering how many lies I had swallowed just to keep believing we were still us. And somewhere between midnight and dawn, something inside me finally snapped. Not with anger. Not with rage. With something colder. I realized that if Mara thought my love was a leash, if she thought freedom meant trading loyalty for attention from strangers, then she could have it. She could have all the freedom she wanted. But what she wouldn't have was me waiting quietly on the sidelines anymore. No more sad late-night drives. No more hoping. No more wishing things could go back to how they were. I wasn't going to fight for someone who didn't even notice I was gone. I was going to disappear so completely from her world that even if she one day regretted it, there would be nothing left for her to find. And when Mara realized what true loneliness felt like, it would be a lesson she taught herself. The next morning, while the world outside the motel carried on like nothing had changed, I packed up my few things and made a decision. I wasn't just going to disappear from Mara's life. I was going to rebuild my own from scratch, without her fingerprints smudged all over it. First, I closed our joint accounts. Not out of spite, just survival. Everything I had contributed, every paycheck I had dutifully deposited while she chased excitement, I took what was mine and left her the rest. I wasn't interested in dragging this through lawyers or public battles. I wanted distance, not drama. I switched phones. New number, new carrier, new everything. I left my old phone powered off in the motel room drawer, like shedding an old skin I didn't want to carry anymore. Every memory, every desperate call or text I hoped would come, all of it stayed locked away in that silent, dead device. I even changed cities. Packed my beat-up Honda and drove 3 hours north to a town no one we knew had reason to visit. Found a cheap apartment above a bakery that always smelled like burnt cinnamon rolls. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Starting over sounds romantic when you see it in movies. But in reality, it's cold, lonely, and brutally quiet. I spent nights lying on a mattress on the floor, staring at the cracked ceiling, wondering if Mara even noticed I was gone yet. Weeks passed. The loneliness was a living thing sometimes, curling up beside me at night, whispering doubts into the silence. Maybe she was better off without me. Maybe I had smothered her without realizing it. Maybe I was the villain in her story after all. And just when those thoughts started digging too deep, life decided to answer them for me. One evening, about a month after I left, I got a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. It was Mara. Her voice, usually sharp and fast, sounded hollow, scared. She stumbled over her words, asking where I was, why I wasn't home, why I hadn't responded to her messages. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because of how absurd it all sounded. After all her speeches about freedom, all her cold dismissals, all her late nights and secret smiles meant for someone else, now she noticed the silence I left behind. I didn't tell her where I was. I didn't offer comfort. I simply told her, in the calmest voice I've ever used, "You said you weren't mine to keep, Mara. So I let you go." The call ended with her whispering my name like she wasn't sure if she was awake or dreaming. For the first time in months, I slept through the night. But the story between me and Mara wasn't finished yet. Not even close. Because the true consequences of my absence, the ones she had never anticipated, were only just beginning to unfold. A few days after that strange call, I started getting letters. Not texts, not emails, actual handwritten letters. Like something out of a different century. Each one came in the same pale blue envelope, written in Mara's rushed, familiar handwriting. At first, I didn't open them. I stacked them on the kitchen counter of my small apartment, next to the second-hand coffee maker that sputtered more steam than coffee. They sat there like tiny blue ghosts, a reminder that the past wasn't quite finished with me yet. But curiosity, or maybe weakness, eventually got the better of me. The first letter was full of apologies. Apologies for the fights, the nights she didn't come home, the growing distance she never tried to bridge. She said she missed me. That freedom wasn't what she thought it would be. That being adored by strangers wasn't the same as being loved by someone who actually knew her. It should have felt good to read. Validation. Proof that I wasn't crazy or overly sensitive. But all I felt was exhaustion. It was too late for apologies. The part of me that had once burned for her was now just embers, buried under the wreckage she had created. Still, more letters came. Each one a little more desperate than the last. She confessed to things I hadn't even asked about. The nights out with the girls that were really nights with him. The lies she told just to see if I would catch her. The game she played because she wanted to feel powerful. One night, after getting home late from work, I found a thicker envelope waiting for me. Inside wasn't a letter, it was a photograph. A photo of Mara sitting alone on the front steps of our old house. Her hair was messy. She wasn't wearing makeup. Her eyes were red and puffy, like she had been crying for hours. On the back of the photo, in shaky handwriting, she had written, "Come home, please. I made a mistake." I sat at the kitchen table, the photo in one hand, a cold cup of coffee in the other, and felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, no longing. Just a dull, heavy silence that told me whatever we had once been was truly gone. She wasn't reaching out because she loved me. She was reaching out because she realized too late that the world wasn't as eager to catch her as she thought. I thought that would be the end of it, that she'd eventually accept it and move on. But Mara was never good at letting go, especially when she realized something valuable had slipped through her fingers. I was about to find out just how far she was willing to go to drag me back into the life I had fought so hard to escape. And believe me, she went further than I ever imagined. It started with the small things, or at least, small enough that I could pretend they didn't matter. The first time, I came home from work and noticed a faint smell of her perfume in the hallway outside my apartment. I told myself it was a coincidence. Maybe someone else wore the same brand. But then it happened again. And again. And not just the smells sometimes. I'd find things slightly moved. My welcome mat a little off-center. A sticky note on the neighbor's door that hadn't been there in the morning. Mara was looking for me. At first, I thought she didn't know exactly where I had gone. But that illusion shattered the evening I found her sitting on the hood of my car, arms crossed, looking both furious and broken at the same time. I froze in my tracks, groceries dangling from one hand. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then she slid off the car and walked toward me, her voice shaking. "You didn't even say goodbye," she whispered, like I had wronged her. Like she was the one abandoned, not the one who had burned everything to the ground. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Every word I wanted to say was too tangled in anger and sadness. So I brushed past her, unlocked the building door, and stepped inside. She didn't follow me. Not that night. But it didn't stop there. The next day, there were flowers left outside my door, a battered bouquet, wilting under the heat. No note. Just the flowers, like some kind of offering left at a grave. I tossed them into the dumpster without a second thought. Later that week, my landlord mentioned someone had been hanging around the building, asking questions. Blonde, pretty, said she was my sister. I didn't have a sister. I didn't need to ask who it was. It became a pattern. Late-night knocks I didn't answer. Texts from unknown numbers that said things like, "Please just talk to me," and "We can fix this." Anonymous voicemails that started with apologies and ended in sobs. It was like Mara had flipped a switch in her mind. The woman who once accused me of trying to control her was now trying to control me, clawing her way back into a life she had so carelessly discarded. And somewhere deep inside, despite everything she had done, a small, broken part of me almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But pity wasn't enough to erase betrayal. I had given Mara everything, my trust, my loyalty, my heart, and when that hadn't been enough, she had thrown it away like it was nothing. Now, she was finally realizing the cost of her freedom. And she was realizing it alone. But the worst was still coming. Because Mara was desperate. And desperate people do desperate things. It was a Thursday night when Mara crossed a line that even she couldn't walk back from. I had just gotten home from another long shift, my clothes smelling like coffee and burnt toast from the tiny diner where I worked to make ends meet. I kicked off my boots, let my body sink into the lumpy couch, and closed my eyes, grateful for a few hours of quiet. Then the pounding started. Not a knock. Not a tap. Pounding, like fists hammering against the front door hard enough to rattle the hinges. My heart jumped into my throat. I stayed frozen for a second, hoping whoever it was would just give up and leave. But the pounding only grew louder, more frantic. I dragged myself up and peeked through the peephole. Of course it was her. Mara stood there, hair wild, mascara smudged, looking less like the polished woman I married and more like a ghost that had clawed its way back from the edge of madness. Against every ounce of better judgment, I cracked the door open an inch. "You have to talk to me," she cried, her voice breaking. "Please, Curtis, I made a mistake. I didn't know what I was doing. I thought you didn't care anymore. I thought you'd stopped loving me." There it was. The final twist of the knife. I wanted to yell at her. I wanted to ask her if the guy she let into our home made her feel loved. If the freedom she fought so hard for was worth the wreckage she caused. But instead, I just stared at her. This woman who had once been my entire world, and felt nothing but hollow, aching emptiness. "You left first, Mara," I said quietly. "You just didn't bother to pack." Her face crumpled like a sandcastle under a wave. She tried to reach for me, but I stepped back, the door closing between us. I locked it, turned off the lights, and stood in the dark, listening to her sobs fading down the hallway. I thought that was the end. I was wrong. The next morning, when I got to work, my manager pulled me aside, looking uncomfortable. "Hey, Curtis, some woman came by last night asking about you. Said she was your wife." He handed me a folded piece of paper. On it, in Mara's handwriting, was scrawled, "I'll wait, however long it takes." I felt sick. It wasn't love. It was obsession now. Mara wasn't trying to rebuild what we lost. She was trying to possess it, to erase the fact that she had ever let it slip through her fingers. And I knew, deep in my gut, that if I didn't take real steps to cut her out completely, she was going to destroy whatever fragile piece I had managed to build. Leaving her hadn't been enough. Now I was going to have to disappear again, this time for good. And this time, I couldn't leave any trace behind. I spent the next few days putting together a plan, not because I wanted to, but because I had no other choice. Mara wasn't going to let this go, and every second I stayed in that town, in that small, creaky apartment above the bakery, was another second she inched closer to dragging me back into her chaos. First, I quit my job. Quietly, no drama. Just a simple conversation with my manager, who looked both disappointed and relieved. I didn't tell him where I was going. I barely knew myself. Next, I sold almost everything I owned. Furniture, clothes, even my old Honda. I packed only what I could fit into a single worn backpack, some cash, a few essentials, and a couple of faded photos that reminded me of who I used to be before all this. Before Mara. Finally, I bought a bus ticket under a different name. Not to anywhere special. Just away. Away from the places where her memory clung to every sidewalk, every restaurant, every gas station. Somewhere she wouldn't think to look, because maybe deep down, she still believed I was too weak to really leave. On my last night in town, as I sat on the edge of the sagging mattress staring out the window, I thought about how it all started. How a simple bookstore meeting turned into a life, then a marriage, then a war neither of us won. I wondered if Mara was sitting somewhere right now, writing another desperate letter, or if she was still circling my apartment, clinging to the idea that she could fix something she had broken beyond repair. But it didn't matter anymore. By dawn, I was gone. I didn't leave a note. I didn't send a final text. I simply vanished. The bus ride out of town was long and heavy with silence. I stared out the dirty window at miles of gray highways and nameless towns flashing by, each one erasing a little more of the life I left behind. I thought I would feel free, that I'd feel like I had escaped something toxic, something soul-crushing. But mostly, I just felt tired. Tired of loving someone who didn't know how to be loved. Tired of begging for scraps of loyalty from a woman who thought independence meant betrayal. Tired of carrying the blame for a failure that wasn't mine alone. And maybe, somewhere deep in my chest, there was still a small ember of hope that somewhere ahead, there was a version of me who wasn't defined by her choices. A version who could start again, not as a victim, but as someone who finally remembered how to live without begging to be wanted. It wouldn't happen overnight, but at least now it could happen. Because for the first time in a long, painful time, I wasn't fighting to be loved anymore. I was fighting to be free. And this time, I was going to win. Months passed. The days stopped feeling so heavy. I found a small job at a mechanic shop in a coastal town, a place where no one knew my name and no one cared about my past. The owner, a gruff old man named Warren, taught me how to fix engines, how to sand down rusted metal, how to rebuild something broken with my own hands. Funny, isn't it? How fixing battered machines somehow helped fix parts of myself I thought were gone forever. I rented a tiny cabin by the water. Nothing fancy, just 4 walls, a creaky bed, and a view of the ocean that caught fire every evening at sunset. I spent hours just sitting on the porch, listening to the waves crash against the shore, feeling the pieces of who I was slowly stitching themselves back together. There were bad days, of course. Days when I woke up tangled in old memories. Days when I wondered if I had made the right choice. But the bad days came less often now. And when they did, I didn't drown in them the way I used to. One evening, while picking up groceries, I bumped into someone, quite literally. She was small, dark-haired, and laughed when I apologized for almost knocking her over. Her name was Lila. She worked at the little bookstore by the pier, the kind of place Mara would have hated because it didn't have fancy coffee or curated playlists. We talked for a while. Then we talked again the next day, and again the next. I wasn't ready for anything big, and Lila wasn't asking for anything except honesty. She didn't need grand gestures or empty promises. Just time. And slowly, carefully, I realized that maybe healing wasn't about forgetting the people who hurt you. Maybe it was about building a life so full of your own peace that their memory simply doesn't fit inside it anymore. One evening, sitting beside Lila on the beach, watching the sun sink into the horizon, I finally felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not for a perfect life, not for a fairy tale ending, just for a future that belonged to me again. A future where I wasn't someone's second choice. A future where I didn't have to beg for love. A future where I was enough, simply by being myself. And in that quiet moment, As the waves whispered at our feet and the sky burned orange and gold, I realized that losing Mara wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of it.